Shalom, shalom, my fellow believers. Greetings, family, and welcome, or welcome back, friends, to Bible and a Bicycle. We're going to turn it over to one of my favorite theologians and biblical scholars, and that's the late, great Dr. Michael Heiser.
Now, again, a lot of you are familiar with the two powers stuff that I do and talk about, especially again if you've read the book. But for those who are not, of course, you have the Shema, very familiar creedal statement from Judaism. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. I bring this up because how could a Jew affirm that and then write this? No one has ever seen God. The only God who is at the Father's side. Okay. How do you pull that off? He has made him known. Now, John is a Jew. He knows the Shema. What in the world is going on here? At one time in Judaism used to affirm something that they used to talk about positively as the two powers in heaven idea. This is not dualism, one good guy, one bad guy, of equal weight. Okay, it's not Marvel Comics or anything like that. These were two good guys. Okay, two powers in heaven. And that idea falls into ill repute, disrepute, at around the 2nd century. Again, not coincidentally the time, when we have the advent of Christianity and a few other things going on. But Judaism at one point in its history essentially had a Godhead teaching. And they get it from their Old Testament. So when you have a Jew like John who writes this, of course, knowing the Shema, he's not thinking when he's writing this, this is good. I get to deny my faith in the God of Israel now. Okay, he's not thinking that at all. So he's sort of the exemplar for just the average question, even for Jewish converts in the book of Acts or whatever. How is it that these people, Jews, who refused even on pain of death to worship another God, how could they at the same time turn around and embrace Jesus as God in the flesh, worship him, sing praises to him, again, talk about him the way they do? How could they do that and not feel like they were violating the formative creedal statement of the Old Testament? How does that work? And it's a big deal. I mean, it's still a big deal for Jews I've met. Again, we're going to go through this real quickly, but there's a whole rabbinic discussion about the two powers prior to the 2nd century. And just an example of one verse, the rabbis would pick up on different verses that they knew, looking at it, was a little bit odd. There was something odd in them. Genesis 19:24, this is the Sodom and Gomorrah story, which I'm sure all of you have read. But you look at this, and what's odd about it? You tell me. Yeah, it sounds like there's two Yahwehs. Yahweh raining fire upon Sodom and Gomorrah, sulfurous fire, and that sulfurous fire happens to be from Yahweh. So how can Yahweh, send this sulfurous fire from Yahweh? It was just odd. And rabbis would notice these things and discuss them. Again, the major book on this, if you're interested, is still in print. It was printed in 1977, The Two Powers in Heaven, by Alan Siegel. Siegel passed away a few years ago. He was a Jewish scholar, rabbinic scholar, and his book is about the history of this idea in Judaism. He goes through all the rabbinic material, again, establishing the fact that, yep, we used to teach this. And boy, it's heretical, isn't it? Because he was a Jew. He doesn't want to go along with it, but his book is just about, this used to be part of our theology. Again, until the 2nd century AD. Other passages. Daniel, again, you have the Ancient of Days seated And then you have, the description, which is, all familiar to us. Hair like lamb's wool, thrown in tongues of flame, just like Ezekiel 1. I mean, we know who this is, the wheels, the whole bit. And then the court sat, again, divine council meeting, the books were open, one like a human being, one like a son of man, a human one, came with the clouds of heaven, dominion, glory, and kingship were given to him. There's something else about this passage that I don't have in red. I don't even know if you can see the color there. This whole motif of the coming upon the clouds, which I'm not going to get into specifically here. I'll get into some other two power stuff, but I'll mention this much. In the ancient Near Eastern world, the epithet, the one who comes with the clouds, or the one who comes upon the clouds, or the one who rides the chariot in the clouds, something like that. That was a known epithet for Baal. Okay, Baal is not an underling. He's not just an angel. Okay, I'm saying this for like Jehovah's Witnesses, because Jehovah's Witnesses like to take deity language used of Jesus and say, oh, he's just an angel and a created being and all this kind of stuff. Well, the coming upon the clouds thing is a big deal because of the way it gets used in the New Testament when Jesus is on trial, because it goes back to Daniel 7. But anyway, you get this well-known deity phrase. The Old Testament writers use this deity phrase that everybody, Jew or outside of Judaism, whether you're an Israelite or not, they know what this is, because Baal was such a big deal in the ancient world. Baal was worshipped even into the Roman period. Okay, he's just a big figure. And the biblical writers in the Old Testament use the phrase 4 times of Yahweh of Israel. And the reason was Baal was a storm god. He was the god that was perceived as giving us rain. Baal's a wonderful guy because he gives us rain. And that means our crops grow. That means we get to eat. Okay, it means our animals get to eat. We're alive because Baal sends us rain and we can survive. And he's wonderful. Okay? Well, the biblical writers are like, no. Baal isn't the one who controls this stuff. It's Yahweh of Israel. So they would take this label and stick it on Yahweh, to make this theological point. Well, the only place they don't do that, there's one other occurrence, and it's Daniel 7. Here it's applied to a second figure, aside from the God of Israel. And so Jesus knows this. I mean, the Jews knew it. This was one of the primary texts in Judaism to reinforce the two powers in heaven teaching, was this one right here, Daniel 7. So when Jesus is on trial in front of Caiaphas, and Caiaphas says, come on, tell us who you are. Quit beating around the bush. And he says, okay, listen up, Caiaphas. I don't want you to miss this. Hereafter you will see the Son of Man coming upon the clouds, in great glory. You want to know who I am? I'm the guy in Daniel 7 who's the cloud rider. And Caiaphas tears his clothes, says this is blasphemy. He knows instantly what Jesus is saying. And every Jew would have. Because they have this two powers thing. There's Yahweh, but then there's like this other Yahweh. There's like two of them. And in the book Unseen Realm, I refer to it as the two Yahweh figures. But you have two-ness, you have Godhead going on there. And Siegel, again, spends a lot of time on this passage. But I want to show you some specific passages, just a handful, again, because I want to do some other things, where you get the two powers thing going on. Now, we all know Exodus 3. Burning bush, we've seen Charlton Heston. Okay, we all know that. So who's in the bush? Well, God's in the bush. Well, he is. Who else is in the bush? There's two in the bush, okay? Angel of Yahweh, angel of the Lord. And again, Yahweh sees him that he had come to look aside. God calls it. You got at least two in the bush. I mean, some would say 3, but I think it's 2. Okay? You have the God of Israel and this angel guy. They're in the burning bush, calling Moses. Exodus 23, I'm sending an angel. God says to Moses, this is after Sinai, they've gotten the law. It's time to start doing stuff, to prepare for the journey to Canaan, the promised land, all that. And God pulls Moses aside one day and says, hey, I'm sending an angel before you to guard you on the way and to bring you to the place that I have made ready. Pay heed to him and obey him. Do not defy him, for he will not pardon your offenses. Why? Since my name is in him. Now, in Hebrew, the name is Shem. The word for name is Shem. Hashem is the name. And if you have Jewish friends today, they still speak of God himself this way. Now, when I was in graduate school, we had one professor who would not allow us to say Yahweh in class. He didn't like freak out too much if we forgot, depending on what mood he was in, to be honest. He would say, now when we're reading in class and we encounter the divine name, the four consonants, he says, you either say Adonai, which means Lord, that's your substitute, or you say Hashem, the name. And he was fine if we remembered to do either one of those two things. If you slipped up, then he would let you know. But Hashem, the name, is a way of referring to God himself. Deuteronomy, you get lots of these passages where God talks about, hey, when we get to the promised land, there's this place that I have chosen to establish my name. Okay. The promised land is spoken of as the place where God will set up or establish his name. It doesn't mean that, hey, when we get in there, we got to go to this place and then I need somebody to scrawl four consonants in the ground or on a rock. No, it's not a spelling lesson, okay? The language is about, this is where I am going to dwell, this place that I will choose to set my name. I will establish my name. Psalm 20, may the Lord answer you in the day of trouble. May the name of the God of Jacob protect you. Some trust in chariots, some in horses. We trust in the name of the Lord our God. Again, the picture is not this. Well, here we have the Israelites. They're ready to go out to battle, or their town is under siege or whatever. And they're not, they're not out there in the battlefield saying, okay, bring it on, Philistines, bring it on, Assyrians. The Assyrians I refer to as the Klingons of the Old Testament. That's basically what they were, man. They were just awful. You didn't want to run into a Klingon. Okay, an Assyrian. So, but the idea is not, okay, you're coming to attack us, watch this. And they go out and YHWH. There, do something now. Oh yeah, they're going to run over it. Okay, on their way to killing you. I mean, trusting in the name is not trusting in four consonants. It's trusting in a person, an entity, a deity. Okay, the God of Israel, this is the way you refer to God himself. This language, Isaiah 30, it's personified, lips full of fury, tongue like devouring fire. So you go back to Exodus 23 when God tells Moses, look, this angel is a little bit different. You better obey him. He will not pardon your transgressions. He's not going to overlook your offenses because my name is in him. In other words, I am in this guy. When you walk around, you see this guy, that's me. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not over there. Doesn't mean I'm not still in the heavens. Okay, it's just that I can be there and I can be right there at the same time. And this is an embodied human. Okay, this is the way angels are always described. Captain of the Lord's host. Remember that? Joshua encounters the captain of the Lord's host. What does he say? Take your shoes off your feet, because the place where you're standing is holy ground. It's exactly the same thing that is said at the burning bush. He's God in human form. This is not a New Testament concept. This is an Old Testament concept. The angel who has the name, the angel who is Yahweh, but yet he's also not, because God's sending him. So you get this talk in the Old Testament about the angel and the name as being a figure who is Yahweh, because Yahweh is the name, but yet he's not, because Yahweh told him what to do. It's kind of the way we talk about Jesus. Okay, Jesus is God, but he's also not. He's not the Father. Well, if he's not the Father, can he really be God? Well, of course he can be God. You have these discussions, okay? It's the same kind of category conceptualizing going on that goes on in our head when we try to talk about Trinitarian stuff, when we try to kind of grok that, just wrap our minds around it. Well, this is the language you get in the Old Testament in certain passages. This is but isn't kind of thing going on. And this prepares people, it prepared Jews, for things like high Christology. Okay, that God could come as man and still be God there. Which one's God? The answer is yes. Okay, they could understand this in terms of it's a familiar idea. I mean, they can't necessarily explain it logically or whatever, but they know what's being talked about. One's not less than the other. They're both the same, but yet they're still different. So this thinking, is part of the Old Testament. Deuteronomy 4. Who leads the people out of Egypt into the promised land? Well, here it's his presence. It's the panim, it's the presence of God. Well, I thought it was the angel back in Exodus 23. Is it the angel or is it the presence? Well, back here in Judges 2. Well, here we have the angel again. The angel says, well, I'm the one who brought you up from Egypt, took you into the land which I had promised on oath to your fathers. I said, I will never break my covenant with you. Well, is it the angel? Is it the presence? I'm getting confused. Genesis 31. The angel of God comes to Jacob. In verse 13 he says, I am the God of Bethel. Now that's important for Jacob because Bethel is the place where Jacob first encounters God. He builds him an altar there. Okay, in Old Testament theology, you're not offering anything and building altars to alternate deities. Okay, you just don't do that. And here the angel says, I'm the God of Bethel. You've seen me before, Jacob. My favorite passage for this is Genesis 48. This is Jacob blessing Joseph's children, and by proxy, Joseph. So Jacob's on his deathbed, and we know the story about Joseph brings the boys, and then he crosses the arms, and the firstborn, and all that kind of stuff. We have here. But what we miss when we tell the story is the blessing. So verse 15, Jacob blesses Joseph by saying, and there's 3 stanzas to this. The God in whose ways my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked. The word there is Elohim, specifically Ha Elohim. Second stanza, the God who has been my shepherd from my birth to this day. What do you think the third one's going to be? The angel who has redeemed me from all harm. And here's the kicker. May he bless these boys, these lads. In Hebrew, the verb is singular. In other words, it's not proper to translate it, may they bless the boys. It's may he. See, I'm hopelessly confused now. Who does Jacob want to bless Joseph's boys? Is it the angel or is it God? And the answer is, yep. It doesn't make any difference. They're the same, but yet they're different. There's 2, but they're 1, but they're still really 2. Again, it's this whole Godhead thinking that we're familiar with as Christians. You get Judges 6. Gideon, angel of the Lord shows up, sits under the terebinth at Ophrah, under the tree there. Verse 12, the angel of the Lord appears to Gideon and says to him, the Lord is with you. Yahweh is with you, valiant warrior. And Gideon's like, yeah, right. Look around, man. This is a mess. Don't you see what's going on here? Why has all this bad stuff happened to us? And then look at verse 14. Yahweh turned to him. Oh, no, wait a minute. Wait. Okay, we have the angel of Yahweh speaking about Yahweh in the third person. But now Yahweh's talking. Okay, so is Yahweh here another way to refer to the angel, or are they both there? Are they both one? I mean, and again, whoever wrote Judges 6 doesn't really care. Take your pick. They're all the same. Okay, Yahweh turns to him, go in this might of yours and save Israel from Midian. Do not I send you? Okay. Yahweh says to him, I'll be with you, so on and so forth. And then verse 17, there's pronouns. We don't know who's speaking about who because it's ambiguous. But anyway, Gideon says, okay, I think I got it, but let me go make a little gift, little sacrifice offering thing for you. Don't go away. Don't go away. I'll be right back. And so he says, okay, I'll stick around. So Gideon does what he needs to do, comes back, and he brings the stuff to him under the terebinth. Now, that's, of course, where we saw the angel. The angel of God said to him, take the meat, the unleavened cakes, put them on a rock, and He reaches out the tip of his staff that was in his hand. Oh, by the way, the angel is embodied here. This is a language of embodiment. Touch the meat and the unleavened cakes, and they go up in flames. So then the angel of the Lord takes off. The angel of the Lord vanished from his sight. Verse 22. Then Gideon perceived that he was the angel of Yahweh. And Gideon said, Alas, O Lord God, for now I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. But Yahweh's still there. He's still there. So the one guy takes off, the other one's still there. Well, okay, Yahweh's there, the angel of Yahweh, and sometimes it's hard to tell them apart, like who's talking about who and to whom, and what's going on here. Again, whoever wrote the account doesn't care. Yes, he could have made it perfectly explicit who is talking to who's standing where, all this kind of stuff. But they're both in the conversation because this is like Exodus 3. They're both in the bush. They're both, having a discussion, with Moses. The angel's there, so that, we have this embodied, Yahweh idea again. The word of the Lord, again, we're used to this because of John 1. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. Very familiar language. Well, that actually comes from somewhere. And it's not Platonic philosophy. I love commentators. John obviously was influenced by Gnosticism here. No, he actually read his Old Testament. It's Genesis 15. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Profound statement number 5, I think. Okay, you ready? Got your pen ready? I would suggest to you that visions are things you see. Got that down? Okay, this isn't a voice out of the ether, not a voice in the head. He's seeing something. And what he's seeing is the word of the Lord. Don't be afraid, Abram. I am your shield. Your reward will be very great. 1 Samuel 3. Now the young man Samuel was ministering to the Lord under Eli. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. There was no frequent vision. And again, I suggest to you, visions are things you see. It's not that, hey, it's rare for people to be walking around having the voice of God in their head. No, what's rare is that God doesn't show up in human form like he often did with the patriarchs. That wasn't typical anymore. Now Samuel, again skipping to verse 7, had not yet experienced the Lord. The word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. He'd never been visited before. He's just a young boy there with Eli, taking care of the Ark of the Covenant and doing priest stuff. The Lord called Samuel again the third time. Now we know the story. I'm skipping around in it, but they try to go to sleep. Samuel hears this voice. Okay, Samuel. He thinks it's Eli, so he gets up, runs over to where Eli's sleeping. And of course, it's not him. And after a couple times, it dawns on Eli, like, hey, well, it's not me, and it ain't you, so it must be God. Okay, so look, next time it happens, say, "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." Let's try that. So it happens again. Lord called Samuel again the third time, and the Lord, again Yahweh, came and stood. I would suggest to you that a word like standing isn't what you would use if you were referring to an object that isn't visible, or wisps of smoke, or rays of light, or something like that. This is the embodied God of Israel. He comes, and it's the Lord, it's Yahweh, came and stood, calling as at the other times. Samuel says, okay, I'm listening. And then, he gives them bad news about Eli. We know the story, but I like the way it ends. Samuel grew, and the Lord, Yahweh, was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground. And all Israel from Dan to Beersheba knew that Samuel was established as a prophet of the Lord. Why? The Lord appeared again at Shiloh, which is where they're at in 1 Samuel 3. And the Lord revealed himself to Samuel at Shiloh by or as the word of the Lord. Do you realize the word of the Lord is a reference to, in some passages, and we would look at a few here, as God in human form. So when John's writing about it later on, in the beginning was the Word was, with God, the Word was God, and the Word became flesh. and dwelt among us. The Jews aren't like, oh, this is freaking me out, man. What's he talking about? Is he eating mushrooms? Reference to John Allegro there. No, he's not. And you don't really even have to wonder about what he's talking about, because if you had read your Old Testament, you know precisely what he's talking about. Except for this time, it's not just God in human form. This time it's God made flesh, human flesh, incarnation. I mean, this even ups the ante from where it's been. But the concept is the same. Jeremiah 1, call Jeremiah. We all know these passages. The word of the Lord came to me. There it is again. Jeremiah addresses the word of the Lord as Yahweh Elohim, Lord God. And then verse 7, but Yahweh said to him, so it's Yahweh. Yahweh is the word of the Lord. And then in verse 9, then Yahweh put out his hand and touched my mouth. It's the language of embodiment. In this case, it's a tactile experience as well. Again, I'm not saying that every time you get the word of the Lord show up in these passages that it's God in human form, but in some cases it is. Okay, you look for the context. Okay, does the context support it or not? The thing is we often don't even see these things. We kind of tend to think that the New Testament's doing something altogether different, when it's really not. We talked about the cloud rider before. Let me skip down here. Again, Jesus, against all this, is kind of easy, to see. We have John 1, which we've talked about. Again, the Word became flesh. This is why he can say, no one has ever seen God. The only God who is at the Father's side has made him known. Well, how has he made him known? Well, he became flesh. He dwelt among us. The angel. Well, is it, in the Old Testament you get Yahweh delivering the people from Egypt, taking them to the land. You get Panim, the presence. You get the angel doing it. You get Elohim doing it. Who is it, Mike? Is it God? Is it Yahweh? Is it the angel? Is it the presence? And the answer is all of the above. Yeah. But here, for Jude, and I want to remind you, although you once fully knew it, that Jesus, who saved a people out of the land of Egypt, I mean, it's very clear what he's thinking here. He's putting Jesus in this slot, so to speak, the embodied deity idea. By the way, afterward he destroyed those who did not believe. We tend to skip that part of the verse. It's the same guy. Okay? So he can be angered. The name, Jesus. I have manifested your name to the people whom you gave me out of the world. This is Jesus' high priestly prayer. While I was with them, I kept them in or by your name. I made known to them your name. Jesus doesn't show up and say, well, I'm the Son of God, and I'm finally here. I've got a job to do. And everybody listen, gather around. I have an important message. God's name is Yahweh. Thank you. It's absurd. When the language here says, I made known to them your name, Jesus isn't running around saying, hey, God's name, I know God's name, everybody listen. No, they have it a few thousand times in their own Bible. Okay, what he's saying is, well, I made known the name to people. When they looked at me, when they experienced me, when they listened to me, when they interacted with me, they know you. Because I'm you. Okay, I have your name. I have your essence. It's the whole package here. So Jesus revealing the name to people. Isn't Jesus running around telling them what God's name is? They know that. They're not idiots. Okay? He's revealing who God is, what God is like. In human form. In the flesh. Incarnation. The rider in the clouds, we talked about that. There's a few references where some of this language goes into the Spirit. When the Spirit gets grouped with it, we'll skip that for now. But basically what you have, you get this question, where does Trinitarianism come from? And you get these people running around like a Bart Ehrman or somebody like that, and talking about how, this Trinitarian concept, the concept of high Christology is late. The Christian community originally didn't believe any of this, and then somebody came along and said, hey, this would be a good idea for a religion, so let's invent it. And, oh yeah, that is a good idea. Why don't we run with that one? We'll make Jesus God, and won't that be nice? Look, there's a whole discussion in the intertestamental period about who the second power is. You can read Siegel's book, you can read pseudepigraphy, you can read something really boring like the 7th or 8th chapter of my dissertation. Okay. There's a whole slew of candidates because Jews were speculating at will frequently. It was fun. When you don't have TV, this is what you do. Who is the second power? And it usually broke down into 2 categories. I have a whole lecture on this on YouTube. You could go up and watch where I go through the examples. But some people thought it was an Old Testament human that was sort of had a special relationship to God that essentially gets deified. So some texts, Jewish texts, will have Moses sharing the throne with the God of Israel. Some say no, it was Adam. Some said it was Enoch, because Enoch, gets taken away. And some said it was Jacob. Some said it was Abraham, because he was the friend of God. If you were a friend, God would let you have a seat too. Right here in his throne. You get all this discussion. Another camp thought it was a special angel. Michael was a candidate. Gabriel was a candidate. There's an angel in the Second Temple Jewish texts called Yah-Hoel, both 2 names of God combined into one name for that angel. So they're speculating left and right as to who this was. This is hundreds of years before Jesus ever showed up in the incarnation. And when Jesus does show up, and you get the apostles doing some of this stuff, identifying Jesus with Yahweh in all sorts of ways. Some of it was 2 power stuff. They do it in other ways too. But they're like, they're the voice in the back of the room. Call on me. We know who the second power is. It's Jesus of Nazareth. And they want to communicate this idea. This isn't new. You don't need a new religion for this. You have the categories right there. And they're right. They're using them left and right. Now, this is one of the things that drove a wedge between the Jewish community and the Christian community. Because, Jesus is the second power. Well, we'll just add him to the list. Oh, wait a minute. This guy we just killed? hold on. Because if that was right, we're just in a whole lot of trouble. Yeah. That's like more than trouble, It was offensive. It was offensive to them that people could come along and say, you just crucified the second power. But that's what Christians did. And so at the 2nd century, this was declared a heresy by the Jewish community. That's what Siegel's book is about. They also did 2 other things. They standardized the Hebrew text into what we now know as the Masoretic text, and they outlawed the use of the Septuagint for their community. Because the Septuagint has some really curious things in it. I'll give you one. This is my favorite, the Isaiah 9 one, which just floors people. We all know Isaiah 9 because of Handel's Messiah. His name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Prince of Peace, Mighty God, all this stuff. Septuagint doesn't have any of that. The Septuagint says, he shall be called the messenger, the angel, angelos, of the great council. Ouch. You don't want a Christian, or you don't want a Christian quoting that at you, and you don't want somebody in your own community coming across that one. Okay, because that's a pretty clear second power text of the Messiah. Okay, and then Jesus was running around saying lots of this kind of stuff, and so, we don't want anybody to run into that one. So there are just things like this going on historically that, create a wedge between the 2 communities. But the categories were familiar. Now let's talk a little bit about Jesus in the Gospels here. Go into New Testament a little bit. We didn't talk about Bashan, but Bashan is part of cosmic geography. And again, the big piece of cosmic geography is what happens at Babel. But Bashan is a place, a special place in Old Testament thinking. This is where, in Old Testament days, let's see if I have a map here. I think I do at some point. I don't want to get too far into that. I think I do want to hit the. Let me just take a. I'll cheat here and peek here in case you don't know where Bashan is. Oh yeah, there we go. Let's just go here. So you've got. I don't know if you can follow the arrow here at all, but here's Lake Hula. Here's the Sea of Galilee. This region, all around here, of course, you have Bashan. And in the region, again, dominated by Bashan, you have Ashtaroth, and down here a little ways you have the city of Edrei. Now in the Old Testament, this was the place where the conquest, for all intents and purposes, actually begins. Because if you remember the story, Moses and Joshua go up the Transjordan, up the other side of the Jordan, and they encounter various, people groups, giant clans, or at least places that were formerly populated by giant clans. The Moabites, they refer to the giant clans as the Amim. The Ammonites refer to them as the Zamzumim. And the Deuteronomy 2 and 3 says, hey, you don't have to worry about them anymore because your ancestors, at least the Edomites, the people descended from Esau, they took care of these people. You don't have to worry about them, but there's still some left. So God sends them to the north, to Bashan, which, according to Deuteronomy 2 and 3, were the last vestiges of the Rephaim. Og is specifically called the last of the Rephaim. He and Sihon, the two kings of the Amorites, that term is important because the Amorites, when the conquest account is being described in the book of Amos, in Amos 2, he refers to the Amorites as being unusually tall and fierce, tall as the cedars, that kind of thing. So this is actually where the conquest begins. So Bashan is associated with, first of all, the wars under Moses and Joshua to get rid of the giant clans, the last remnants of them on that side of the Jordan. Now in the Promised Land proper, there are plenty of them still there. Because when the Israelites fail to cross in, remember Numbers 13, they send in the spies, and the spies come back and say, oh, the place is just exactly what it's awesome. But there's a problem. The problem is the Anakim live there, and we're like grasshoppers to these people. The Anakim come from the Nephilim, Numbers 13:33. There ain't no way that we're going to be able to pull this off. And Joshua and Caleb are like, what? Don't you remember any of this other stuff? Let's go. Let's get it. And they chicken out, and then they have to wander for 40 years. Okay, so there's this. There are giant clans living on both sides, but on the Transjordan side, they're in Bashan. A couple of other things. Bashan itself as a term is a Semitic term for serpent. A Bathan is how you would pronounce it in Canaanite. So you have that association going on, which again is kind of weird. Right away they're not going to. There's going to be something to be said about that doesn't sound real good. Place of the serpent, that's kind of messy. But the worst part, probably, I think, for the average Israelite was Ashtaroth and Edrei. In Ugaritic texts, Canaanite texts outside the Bible, these places were considered gateways to the netherworld, gateways to the realm of the dead. They were just spooky places. So you had all sorts of associations with this region that were not good. Later in Israel's history, there's going to be a cult center to Baal built at the foot of a particular mountain that's in the region of Bashan. Mount Bashan in the Old Testament is known later as Mount Hermon. There's a cult center dedicated to Baal there. In Jesus' day, it's dedicated to Pan, the god Pan. Before that, it was Zeus. And you have all these associations with this place. Hermon, again, Mount Bashan was the place where the Watchers descend in the books of Enoch, Jubilees and whatnot, where they collude together to corrupt humanity. All of these things are present. I'm just going to skip ahead. We'll skip ahead to the astral stuff here. Come on. There we go. When Jesus shows up, part of his ministry is going to be in this territory. And he goes to Caesarea Philippi, way up here in the corner. Again, this is the region of Bashan. Right here, there's an important mountain. He's going to go to this place. Here it is again, Caesarea Philippi, Mount Hermon right here. Again, in Old Testament times, this is Bashan. Close up. This is the place where two events happen that I just want to focus on, then we'll move on a little bit into the book of Acts. Matthew 16, Mark 8, this is Peter's confession. So Jesus goes to Banyas, okay, next door to where the cult center to Baal used to be, in the region of Bashan, at the foot of Mount Hermon. And he goes to this place, and it's at this place that Jesus asked the question, "Who do men say that I am?" And Peter's like, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus is like, "That's pretty good, Peter. Bless your pointed little head. Okay. Don't get a big head because the Spirit showed you this. You didn't figure this out yourself." But good job. Good job. That's who I am. And you're Peter. And upon this rock, I will build my church. So we have Peter's confession. And the gates of hell, I have here, shall not be able to withstand it. Now, many of your translations have, the gates of hell will not be able, or the gates of hell shall not prevail against it, something like that. The problem with that, against it, is if you looked actually in the Greek text, and we might as well, I think we could rabbit trail enough to go. I'll just show it to you in the interlinear. Let's go to Matthew 16, because you have a pretty interesting problem here. Again, something that the translations, I think, obscure a little bit. Okay. Shall not prevail against it. So we'll turn on the interlinear here. And you'll notice against it, in the column, there is no Greek word corresponding to against. That means that word is supplied in English. There is no preposition here against it. Now the verb form is also interesting. Prevail. We have future active indicative third person plural. Okay, will prevail, shall not prevail, and then we have autes, it. Now you have a choice as a translator here. You can supply a preposition so that it's readable in English, or you can go with this suggestion. The gates of hell will not be able to withstand it. If you use that translation, it matters. Why? Because if you say the gates of hell will not be able to prevail against it, that makes it sound like the church is there, cowering in a corner, taking a beating from the gates of hell. But the gates of hell will never quite kill it off. Okay? It turns the gates of hell into the attacker, and the victim is the church. If you go with this, again, just what's in the Greek text, then the gates of hell shall not be able to withstand it. That turns the whole thing around. That means the church is the one administering the beating, not the other way around. And this is Jesus' point. I mean, where's, we have this whole argument about, upon this rock. Okay, the Catholics say, well, that's a play on words, rock, Petra, Peter, all this kind of stuff. And Peter is the thing that the church is built on, and he was the first pope, and so you should all be Catholic. And the Protestants will turn around and say, no. It's not Peter. This language is taken from something like 1 Corinthians 10, where Jesus is the rock, or God is the stone, or something like that. And so this is really a reference to Jesus. And so we shouldn't be Catholic. We should all be Protestants. All right? I don't think either of them have this correct. I think the rock is where they're standing. I think they're standing, at this region, this particular piece of turf. They're at the foot of Mount Hermon. They are in the place that is associated with the realm of the dead. Again, used to be a cult center to Baal, who was the Lord of the dead in Canaanite religion. And Lord of the dead, by the way, in Christian thinking is who? Satan. Satan, Beelzebul. Remember that? That's Canaanite. Baal-Zebul in Ugaritic is Prince Baal. It becomes a name for Satan later on. And then they tweak it a little bit. They change it to Beelzebub, which is, prince of the flies, like the dung. The flies gather around dung. It's a pejorative. Beelzebub is a slam. It's a slap in the face to this deity. But at any rate, this is all associated with Baal. And this is Baal's region. This is, again, his dominion. So I think what Jesus is really saying is not that I'm going to build this thing on you, Peter, and boy, I hope you're up to the task. Don't get married, okay? Because, it's not stuff like this. He's saying, look, upon this rock, I'm going to build my church, and the gates of hell will not be able to withstand it. I'm going to make Satan's domain his tomb. We're going to just, blow right past this guy. We're going to, build right over top of him. Okay, we are going to defeat the Lord of the dead. Okay, he is ours. He belongs to us. It's him that should be afraid, not us. So then he turns around, and the account says, after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, led them up on a high mountain. Well, there's only one high mountain up there. And, church tradition has the mountain of this next event as Mount Tabor, which is in a slightly different region. And the only reason it is that way is because of Constantine's mom. It is. Constantine's mom was like an ancient archaeologist person. She traveled the Holy Land, and she was a genuine believer by all accounts, but she'd say, well, that's where this happened. It's like, okay, you're the emperor's mom. That's the place. Literally, it just became entrenched tradition. There's nothing in the account to identify the mountain specifically, but they're at Caesarea Philippi and they go up into a high mountain. Well, there's really only one candidate for that. If you're looking at the map, and that's Hermon. So what happens when they go up a little ways into Hermon? What's the next event? It's the Transfiguration. So Jesus picks, he picks Bashan, then he picks Hermon. They go up in there, and he's transfigured. And again, I like to imagine it that Jesus is like, okay, watch quickly. Here's who I really am. So Peter, James, and John get to see, him in his glorified state, but who else gets to see? And the powers of darkness. He's like, I'm here, do something about it. Because after this event, the account says that they turn and they start heading to Jerusalem, and it says, from this time forward, Jesus began to teach his disciples that he has to go to Jerusalem. The Son of Man must go to Jerusalem and die. And they're like freaked out. Like, what? This is where you get behind me, Satan to Peter, because, Peter is opposing this. Wouldn't you? This is freaking them out. And, again, in my imagine, I'm thinking, Jesus like, okay, look, it's fun to go up to Bashan. We all know about that place. It's fun to go poke Satan in the eye a little bit and say, basically, this is the beginning of the end for you. It's fun to do that. It's fun to go over to Hermon and say, here I am, do something about it. But the Son of Man now has to go to Jerusalem and die. He's picking a fight because he knows this is what's supposed to happen. And you've heard me probably say it, before, if you read the book or listened to the podcast. But I do take Paul seriously when Paul says in 1 Corinthians 2, had the rulers of this world known, they would never have crucified the Lord of glory. And this is a Pauline phrase. Yes, it can be used of people, but in other passages it's clearly used of divine beings. This is one of Paul's phrases for the powers of darkness. Had they known, they would have never done this. They're not morons. They're not sitting there thinking, oh, wait, let me see if I understand. If we, kill Jesus, then that's the beginning of the end for us. Oh, sign me up. Okay, they're not doing that. They don't know. They know who he is. It's very clear from the Gospels. You're the Son of the Most High. They know what the end game is. Why else would you be here? He's like, all right, here's Yahweh again talking about this kingdom of God thing again. This is our turf. We're not just going to roll over. because and give him what he wants. They know why he's there, again, in terms of the end game. They know who he is, but they don't know that the key to it all is them killing him. So that's like their solution. The very thing that has to happen is the thing they figure out is the best thing to do. And they don't get it. I mean, and the disciples don't get it either, because like even after the resurrection, the scene toward the end of Luke where he's with them in the upper room, and I mean there he is. He's the risen Christ. He's standing right in front of them, and the account says he had to open their minds to understand. I mean, they still don't get it. He's standing right in front of them. Well, it's not because again they're morons. It's because and this is my whole view of prophecy right here. Prophecy, messianic prophecy, is deliberately cryptic. This is all deliberate. Do you realize there is no verse in the Old Testament that has these elements in it? Okay, a suffering Messiah who would also be God in the flesh, who would die for the sins of the world. You don't have that. You don't have that in any verse in the Old Testament. You have all those pieces, but you don't have it spelled out anywhere. Why? Because God doesn't want anybody to know. Okay, you can only understand it after the fact. And so this is what they have to learn after the fact. Like I said, he's standing right in front of them, and they're like, well, what do we do now? What does all this mean? They don't get it, and he has to teach them. And, he's going to say, I'm going to send the Spirit. By the way, the Spirit is, just as the angel is but isn't Yahweh, and Jesus is but isn't God, the Spirit is but isn't Jesus as well. And that's actually where you get Trinitarian theology from. But I'm going to send the Spirit. He'll teach you these things. Just don't worry about it. You'll get it. Got a job for you. So, all of this, though, is deliberately cryptic. They're not supposed to be able to figure it out. It's splintered in 100 pieces, scattered in 100 places. It's only knowable after the fact. That's all by design. So, you get critics, and the way I kind of got started on this online anyway was somebody sent me some email by some atheist or whatever. Oh, Matthew screws up this passage in the Old Testament. Ha ha ha. The Bible's just a bunch of malarkey. And so I wrote a piece on my blog called "Were the New Testament Authors Hermeneutical Hacks?" No, they're not. And I could tell by his response he'd never gotten my response before. But that's a shame because, again, I look at it and think, well, why aren't we taking Paul seriously? I mean, have you ever thought, if they could just go read it, they could have figured it out. It's not hard. You just read. Well, spirits can't read. Well, get somebody who can read for you and then talk out loud. I mean, it's discoverable. But if it's designed to not be discoverable, it ain't. And that's the whole point. So they're not doing dumb stuff with it. It's just that's the way it is. So what time is it? Do a time check here too.
Why not stop if you're not already subscribed? Tap that little subscribe button down there. Give us a little love with that thumbs up right next door. And make sure that you hit that share button and share this here little video with any friends or family members that you think might benefit from or enjoy watching this here video. Hope to see you here next time. And until next time, remember, Yeshua, Jesus loves you. And so do I. Now get off of here, go ride your bike, and read your Bible.